I don't care what your story is, this ticket is fake and you're not boarding this aircraft.
You can't do that! My grandma is dying!
She tore up a young black girl's ticket. Seconds later, she found out her father is a multi-trillionaire. This ticket is fraudulent. I'm confiscating it. But my dad bought it. Please, I need to get on that plane. I don't care what your story is. This ticket is fake, and you're not boarding this aircraft. You can't do that. My grandmother is dying. Security is already on their way. You need to step aside. Please don't do this. That was the sound of a 12-year-old girl begging an airline employee not to destroy her only way to see her dying grandmother. What you just heard was a gate agent destroying a child's plane ticket. A 45-year veteran airline employee who saw a 12-year-old black girl with a first-class ticket and decided it couldn't be real. But Margaret Thompson had no idea that airport security cameras were recording every single word. And she had absolutely no idea who this child's father was. You saw the ticket being torn. Now we're going to tell you the full story of how this single act of discrimination triggered a chain of events that would end Margaret's career, expose a pattern of abuse that had been hidden for years, force one of America's largest airlines to confront a truth they'd been ignoring, and reveal that the child she just humiliated was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the world. We're going to show you how assumptions about who belongs where can destroy lives in seconds. And we're going to reveal the moment when Margaret realized that the little girl she treated like a criminal had more power behind her than Margaret could have possibly imagined. If you've ever been judged before anyone knew your story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened next will make you understand why some people have to fight for dignity every single day, even when they have billions of dollars. Her name is Charlotte Woods. 12 years old. 7th grader at Brooklyn Prep Academy. And on March 14, 2024, she was just trying to get to Atlanta to see her grandmother. Charlotte lives in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. But not in the way you might think. She doesn't live in a penthouse or a mansion. She lives in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that her father has kept since before his fortune changed everything. It's just the two of them. It's always been just the two of them. Her father is Marcus Woods. And if you follow business news, technology, or finance, you know exactly who that is. Marcus Woods is a multi-trillionaire. One of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. The founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a technology conglomerate that revolutionized cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy storage. Forbes estimates his net worth at $3.7 trillion. That's trillion, with a T. But you wouldn't know any of that by looking at how Charlotte lives. Every morning, Charlotte wakes up at 6:15. She makes breakfast. Usually eggs and toast for her dad when he's home, cereal for herself. She leaves notes on the fridge. Little things. Have a good day, Dad. Don't forget your lunch. Love you. Then she takes the subway alone to school. The L train to the G train to the stop 3 blocks from Brooklyn Prep. She's been doing this since 6th grade. Marcus wanted to assign her a driver, a security detail, but Charlotte insisted she wanted to be normal. And Marcus, despite having the resources to wrap his daughter in layers of protection, respected her wish. She's a scholarship student. Not because Marcus can't afford the tuition, he could buy the entire school 100 times over, but because Charlotte tested into the program on merit and wanted to earn her place. Honor roll every semester since 4th grade. Captain of the debate team. The kind of kid teachers write college recommendation letters about even though she's only in 7th grade. The kind of kid who still does homework on Friday nights and reads books that aren't assigned. Most of Charlotte's classmates have no idea who her father is. Marcus keeps an extremely low profile. No social media. Rare public appearances. He does his business quietly, gives away billions to charity anonymously, and lives a deliberately simple life. The apartment in Bed-Stuy isn't for show. It's because Marcus grew up there, and he never wanted to forget where he came from. Charlotte's mother, Teresa, died of breast cancer when Charlotte was 3. Teresa had been Marcus's college sweetheart, the woman who believed in him when quantum dynamics was just an idea in a cramped dorm room. When she died, Marcus made a choice. He would raise Charlotte himself. No nannies raising her while he worked. No boarding schools. He restructured his entire life so he could be present for his daughter. But grades and her father's wealth aren't what define Charlotte's life. Two people do. Her father, Marcus, and her grandmother, Lorraine. Lorraine is 68 years old and lives in Atlanta, in the same house where Marcus grew up. The same house where he learned to code on a second-hand computer at the kitchen table. It's a small craftsman bungalow in the West End with a garden Lorraine tends every morning and a porch where she sits every evening. Marcus has offered 1,000 times to buy her a mansion, to move her somewhere safer, bigger, better. Lorraine refuses every time. "This is my home," she tells him. "Your money doesn't change that." Charlotte visits every summer, every Thanksgiving, every spring break. She's been making this trip since she was 7 years old. Always the same flight. LaGuardia to Atlanta. Always in coach, despite the fact that her father could buy the entire airline if he wanted to. Marcus taught Charlotte early, wealth is a responsibility, not an identity. You don't flaunt it. You don't use it to make yourself better than other people. You fly coach. You take the subway. You live like the world is normal, even when your bank account says it's not. 15 times. Charlotte has flown this exact route 15 times in her life. 15 times in coach. 15 times without a single problem. No questions from gate agents. No suspicion from TSA. No drama. Just a kid visiting her grandma. But this trip was different. 2 weeks before March 14th, Lorraine had a stroke. A severe one. She was in the ICU at Grady Memorial Hospital for 4 days before they stabilized her enough to move to a regular room. The doctors said she'd survive, but recovery would be long. Possibly months. And at 68 with diabetes and high blood pressure, there were no guarantees. Marcus called Charlotte into the living room the night they got the news. He sat her down on the couch, held both her hands, and told her that Grandma Lorraine was very sick but that she was fighting. Charlotte cried. Not the dramatic crying of a child, but the quiet, resigned crying of someone who understands that life is fragile. Marcus held her and promised they'd go see her as soon as he could get away from urgent business matters. But Charlotte couldn't wait. Spring break was coming up. She had a week off from school. She needed to see her grandmother. She needed Lorraine to know she was there. So Marcus bought her a ticket. But this time, he did something different. He upgraded her to first class. $1,200 instead of the usual $300. It was a tiny fraction of what he spent every second just in interest accumulation, but it was meaningful. Because, as he told Charlotte, Grandma would want you comfortable. And you deserve it, baby girl. You're going through something hard. You should at least have a nice seat and some space to yourself. Charlotte protested. Old habits. Even though she knew her father had more money than most countries, she'd been raised to think carefully about spending. But Marcus insisted. He handed her the printed ticket 3 days before the flight, kissed her forehead, and said, "You've flown this route 15 times. This is just number 16. You'll be fine." The ticket read, Charlotte L. Woods. First class. Seat 3. LaGuardia to Atlanta. March 14, 2024. 4:15 p.m. departure. The L stood for Lorraine. Charlotte's middle name. Named after the grandmother she was flying to see. March 14th arrived. It was a Thursday. The weather in New York was unseasonably warm for mid-March. 58 degrees. Clear skies. The kind of spring day that makes people forget winter ever happened. Charlotte woke up early, packed her backpack with homework she knew she wouldn't do, a novel for the plane, and a handmade card she'd spent 3 nights making for her grandmother. Construction paper, glitter, markers. On the front, she'd written, "Get well soon, Grandma," with a drawing of the two of them holding hands. Inside, she'd written a letter. 2 pages. About how much she missed her. About how she couldn't wait to sit on the porch and listen to Lorraine's stories. About how she was going to make her laugh until the doctors said she was annoying them. Marcus had early meetings that morning. Virtual calls with Tokyo, London, and Dubai. But before he started his day at 5 a.m., he left Charlotte a note on the kitchen counter next to a $20 bill. For snacks at the airport. "I love you more than you know. Call me when you land. You're the bravest kid I know." Charlotte ordered an Uber at 1:30 p.m. She could have called one of her father's drivers. Marcus kept a small fleet for business purposes. But Charlotte wanted normal. The driver was a chatty guy named Ahmed who asked her where she was going and then told her about his own daughter who was Charlotte's age. He dropped her off at Terminal C at LaGuardia at 2:47 p.m. Charlotte tipped him $5 from the $20 her dad left her. Inside the terminal, it was chaos. Spring break chaos. Families everywhere. Kids running. Parents yelling. Announcement echoes bouncing off the high ceilings. The smell of Auntie Anne's pretzels and Dunkin' coffee thick in the air. Charlotte navigated it all with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. She went straight to the Coastal Airlines check-in kiosks, printed her boarding pass even though she already had the ticket, and headed to security. TSA pre-check line. Charlotte had been enrolled since she was 10, not because of her father's wealth, but because Marcus traveled constantly for business and added her to his account. She put her backpack on the conveyor belt, walked through the metal detector, and collected her stuff on the other side. The TSA agent, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, even complimented her backpack. "I love the pins," she said, pointing to the collection of enamel pins Charlotte had covering the front. Little books, a debate trophy, a Brooklyn flag. Charlotte smiled and said thank you. She bought a bottle of water and a magazine at Hudson News. Teen Vogue. She wasn't really into fashion, but the cover story was about young activists and she wanted to read it. Then she walked to gate C7. Her flight was on time. Boarding at 3:45. Departure at 4:15. She found a seat in the waiting area. Pulled out her phone. Texted her dad. At the gate. "Love you." Marcus replied within seconds. He was between calls, stealing a moment to check his phone. "Love you more. Call me when you land. Tell Grandma I'm coming tomorrow. You're the bravest kid I know." Charlotte smiled at her phone. Read the message twice. Put her phone in her lap and looked around the gate area. Businessmen in suits typing on laptops. Families wrangling toddlers. College kids with oversized headphones. A woman knitting. An elderly couple holding hands. Normal. Everything was completely normal. At 3:45, the gate agent made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin boarding Flight 447 with service to Atlanta. We'll start with our first-class passengers, followed by our Sky Priority members, and then general boarding." Charlotte stood up, grabbed her backpack, walked toward the gate with her ticket in hand. She got in line behind a businessman in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. In front of him was an older white woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a Burberry carry-on. Charlotte stood there, waiting her turn. Completely unaware. Completely innocent. Just a kid trying to see her grandmother. The daughter of one of the most powerful men on earth, traveling like any other 12-year-old. And that's when she noticed the woman at the gate watching her. The gate agent was a woman named Margaret Thompson. 52 years old. 45 years with Coastal Airlines. She wore the standard uniform, navy blue blazer, crisp white shirt, a red and blue striped scarf tied neatly at her neck. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Not a strand out of place. She wore a small American flag pin on her lapel and a name tag that read, Thompson, Gate Supervisor. Margaret was known by her colleagues as thorough. By passengers, she was known as difficult. She was the kind of gate agent who checked every ID twice, who questioned every boarding pass, who made families with strollers prove the stroller would fit in the overhead bin before letting them through. She took pride in her work. She'd been Employee of the Month 7 times. She had a perfect attendance record. She'd been with Coastal through mergers, bankruptcies, and 3 different uniform changes. This job was her identity. And right now, Margaret was watching Charlotte Woods with suspicion in her eyes. She watched Charlotte stand in the first-class boarding line. Watched her shift her weight from foot to foot. Watched her adjust the straps on her backpack. Margaret's arms crossed over her chest. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved from Charlotte to the businessman in front of her, then back to Charlotte. The businessman reached the podium. Margaret scanned his ticket, handed it back with a smile. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Patterson." The silver-haired woman stepped forward. Margaret scanned her ticket. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Whitmore." Then it was Charlotte's turn. She stepped up to the podium. smiled politely the way her father taught her to always smile at people in authority. "Good afternoon," she said quietly. She handed Margaret her ticket. Margaret took it, but she didn't immediately scan it. She stared at it, then at Charlotte, then back at the ticket. Her eyes moved over every detail. The name, the seat number, the class of service. Then she scanned it. The scanner beeped green. A valid ticket. The system confirmed it. Charlotte Woods. Seat 3, first class. But Margaret didn't hand the ticket back. She kept staring at Charlotte. Then at the ticket. Then at Charlotte again. "Where did you get this?" Before we continue, if the story is already hitting different, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next is going to show you exactly why some people's everyday experiences are everyone else's worst nightmare. Even when they have more money than entire countries. And drop a comment right now. Have you ever been questioned about something that was rightfully yours? Because Charlotte's about to learn that owning something and being believed you own it are two very different things, no matter who your father is. Charlotte blinked. Confused. "My dad bought it for me." Margaret didn't respond right away. She just kept looking at Charlotte with this expression that Charlotte couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something else. Skepticism. Disbelief. "Your dad bought you a first-class ticket to Atlanta." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. But the way Margaret said it made it sound like an accusation. Charlotte nodded, still polite, still trying to follow the rules the way she'd been taught. "Yes, ma'am. I'm visiting my grandmother. She's in the hospital." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "How old are you?" 12. "And you're traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am. I've done it before. Lots of times." Margaret held up the ticket, studying it like it was a piece of evidence in a crime. "This is a $1,200 ticket. First class. Purchased 3 days ago." Charlotte didn't know what to say to that. It felt like Margaret was waiting for her to defend something, but Charlotte didn't understand what. $1,200 was nothing to her father. He made that much in less than a second. But Charlotte had been taught never to say things like that. Never to flaunt wealth. Never to make people feel small. So she just nodded. Margaret's voice dropped lower. "Can I see your ID?" Charlotte reached into her backpack and pulled out her wallet. She handed over her school ID. Brooklyn Prep Academy. Charlotte Woods. Student ID number. Her slightly awkward school photo from September. Margaret examined it like she was looking for signs of forgery. She held it up to the light. Checked the edges. Compared the photo to Charlotte's face. "This ticket is under the name Charlotte L. Woods." "That's me." "The L is for Lorraine." "That's my grandma." Behind Charlotte, other passengers were starting to gather in line. A man in a Yankees cap. A young couple with a baby. A woman in business attire checking her watch impatiently. Margaret ignored all of them. Her focus was entirely on Charlotte. "I'm going to need to see proof of purchase." Charlotte's stomach dropped. "I don't have that. My dad bought it on his computer." "So you can't prove this ticket belongs to you." "It has my name on it. Anyone could have printed this." "Do you have a credit card statement? A receipt? A confirmation email?" Charlotte's hands started shaking slightly as she pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her email. Nothing. Marcus had booked the ticket through his own account, his own email. Why would she have the confirmation? I can call my dad. He can tell you." Margaret cut her off. "Step aside, please." "What?" Charlotte's voice rose slightly. "But the scanner said it's valid." "The scanner reads the barcode. That doesn't mean the ticket wasn't fraudulently obtained." The words hit Charlotte like a slap. Fraudulently obtained. The implication was clear. Margaret thought Charlotte had stolen this ticket. Or that someone had given it to her illegally. Or that somehow, this 12-year-old girl in a Brooklyn Prep hoodie with a backpack covered in enamel pins was running some kind of scam. "I didn't do anything wrong." Charlotte's voice cracked. Margaret turned slightly and signaled to her colleague. A younger gate agent named Derek, maybe 30, with wire-rimmed glasses and an uncomfortable expression. He approached the podium. Margaret leaned in close to him, but not close enough. Charlotte heard fragments. Unaccompanied minor. First-class ticket. Can't verify purchase. Possible fraud. Derek glanced at Charlotte, then back at Margaret. Did you run it through the system check? The scanner cleared it, but that doesn't mean. Margaret, maybe we should? I've got this. Derek hesitated but nodded and stepped back. Margaret turned to Charlotte. You need to step out of line. Now. But my flight. Step out of line, or I'll have security remove you. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She stepped aside. The businessman in the Yankees cap moved forward, handed Margaret his ticket. She scanned it with a smile. Have a great flight, sir. Charlotte stood off to the side, watching passengers board around her. Some of them looked at her with curiosity. Some with pity. Most didn't look at all. They just wanted to get on their flight. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and called her dad. It rang once. Twice. Then Marcus answered. Hey, baby girl. Everything okay? Charlotte's voice broke immediately. Dad, the lady won't let me on the plane. She says the ticket is fake. There was a pause. A very brief pause. Then Marcus's voice came back, and it had changed. Still calm, but with an edge of steel underneath. Put her on the phone. She won't talk to me, Dad. She called security. She called security? Another pause. Baby, I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me? I'm trying. I know you are. You're doing great. I'm handling this right now. Don't hang up. Charlotte could hear typing in the background. Fast, purposeful typing. Her father accessing systems, making calls, mobilizing resources. Margaret approached her again, Derek following reluctantly behind. We've decided we cannot allow you to board with this ticket. Charlotte looked up at her, tears streaming down her face, phone still pressed to her ear. But I need to see my grandma. She's really sick. If this is a legitimate ticket, your father can take this up with our customer service department and receive a refund. Charlotte heard her father's voice through the phone. Tell her Marcus Woods would like to speak with her supervisor. Now. Charlotte repeated it, her voice shaking. My dad says he wants to speak to your supervisor. Margaret's expression didn't change. Your father can call our customer service line. Young lady, Margaret's voice dropped even lower, taking on a tone that made Charlotte's skin crawl. I don't know where you got this ticket or who helped you get it, but I've been doing this job for 45 years. I know fraud when I see it. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Charlotte stared at her. You think I stole this? Through the phone, Charlotte heard her father's voice, barely controlled. Charlotte, step back from the podium. Don't say anything else. Just wait. Margaret didn't answer directly. Instead, she did something that Charlotte would replay in her mind for months afterward. Something that seemed to happen in slow motion but was probably only a few seconds. Margaret took the ticket. Charlotte's ticket. The one with her name on it. The one her father had purchased. The one that was her only way to get to her dying grandmother. And she tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping cut through the ambient noise of the airport. Charlotte gasped. Actually gasped. Her hand reached out instinctively. No. You can't. Margaret tore it again. Into quarters. This ticket is now voided. You are not boarding this aircraft. Charlotte was openly sobbing now. Not the quiet tears from before. Full, gut-wrenching sobs that made her shoulders shake. Please, please, my grandma is dying, I have to get there. Through the phone, Marcus's voice. Charlotte, I heard everything. Stay where you are. Do not leave that gate. Help is coming. Derek shifted his weight uncomfortably. Margaret, maybe we should call a supervisor? Margaret silenced him with a single look. Final. She turned back to Charlotte. You need to leave the gate area immediately. If you don't, I'm calling airport security. The businessman who'd boarded earlier, the one in the Yankees cap, had apparently heard the commotion from inside the jetway. He stepped back out. Excuse me, he said, approaching Margaret. This seems excessive. The scanner cleared her ticket. She's just a kid. Margaret whirled on him with the same cold efficiency. Sir, unless you want to be removed from this flight, I suggest you board immediately. The man hesitated, looked at Charlotte with genuine pity in his eyes, then looked back at Margaret, then back at Charlotte, and he boarded. No one else said anything. The other passengers in line watched in uncomfortable silence. A few pulled out their phones. Some were definitely recording, though Charlotte didn't notice in the moment. Margaret pulled out her radio, pressed the button. Security to gate C7. We have an unaccompanied minor refusing to comply with gate agent instructions. Static, then a voice. Gate C7, copy that. En route. Charlotte wasn't refusing to comply. She wasn't doing anything except standing there crying and holding her phone, listening to her father's voice trying to comfort her from miles away. Charlotte looked down at the torn pieces of ticket on the podium. Her name split in half. The seat number separated from the flight number. Her grandmother's namesake, Lorraine, divided into syllables that meant nothing anymore. I'm not refusing, Charlotte whispered. I just want to go home. But she didn't mean Brooklyn. She meant Atlanta. She meant her grandmother's bedside. She meant the place where someone was waiting for her who would never question whether she belonged. Marcus's voice came through the phone. Baby, I need you to listen to me. In about 3 minutes, some people are going to arrive at that gate. They work for me. They're going to help you. Until then, just stay calm. Can you do that? Charlotte nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay. Margaret stood with her arms crossed, watching Charlotte like she was a threat. Like this 12-year-old girl with tears running down her face and a homemade card in her backpack was somehow dangerous. The radio crackled again. Security to gate C7. 2 minutes. But something else was happening that Margaret didn't know about. In the 2 minutes since Charlotte had called her father, Marcus Woods had made 4 phone calls. The first was to his head of security, mobilizing a team to LaGuardia immediately. The second was to his lead attorney, putting legal on notice. The third was to a contact at the FAA. And the fourth was to someone he rarely called but who owed him several very large favors, the CEO of Coastal Airlines. Because when you're worth $3.7 trillion, you don't wait for customer service. You go straight to the top. 2 minutes felt like an eternity. Passengers continued boarding around this scene. The flight was going to leave on time. Everyone would get where they needed to go. Everyone except Charlotte. She stood there, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear, trying to understand what she'd done wrong. She'd followed every rule. Been polite. Had the right ticket. Done everything exactly the way she was supposed to. But none of that mattered. Because Margaret Thompson had looked at a 12-year-old black girl with a first-class ticket and decided, without evidence, without verification, without even basic human compassion, that something must be wrong. She had no idea she'd just made the biggest mistake of her career. If you're feeling that tightness in your chest right now, if you're angry, if you're heartbroken for this child, hit that subscribe button. Because you need to see how this ends. You need to see what happens when someone finally checks the facts Margaret refused to check and discovers exactly who they just messed with. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you'd witnessed this? Would you have spoken up, or would you have boarded like everyone else? 2 airport security officers arrived at gate C7 at exactly 3:58 p.m. Officer James Martinez and Officer Sarah Kim. Martinez was in his mid-30s, Latino, with the build of someone who'd played college football. Kim was early 30s, Korean-American, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of a situation instantly. Both wore the standard LaGuardia security uniform, dark pants, light blue shirts, radios on their belts, badges gleaming under the fluorescent terminal lights. But 30 seconds behind them came 3 other people. 2 men and 1 woman, all in dark suits, moving with the kind of purpose that made people instinctively step aside. They weren't airport security. They were something else entirely. Margaret saw the security officers approaching and immediately walked toward them, leaving Charlotte standing alone near the podium. She met them halfway, her body language completely different now. Where she'd been rigid and cold with Charlotte, she was almost deferential with the officers. Professional. Concerned. The perfect employee dealing with a difficult situation. Thank you for coming so quickly, Margaret said, her voice taking on a tone of exhausted patience. I have an unaccompanied minor who attempted to board with what I believe is a fraudulent ticket. She held up the torn pieces like evidence in a trial. Officer Martinez looked at the pieces, his eyebrows rising slightly. Then he looked past Margaret to where Charlotte stood, still crying, still holding her phone to her ear, still listening to her father's voice. But before Martinez could speak, one of the suited individuals stepped forward. A woman, early 40s, black, with an air of absolute authority. She held up a badge. Special Agent Lisa Monroe, FBI White Collar Crimes Division. I need everyone to step back from that child immediately. The gate area went silent. Margaret's face went pale. FBI? I don't understand. You tore up a ticket belonging to Charlotte Woods. Is that correct? Yes, but... And you accused her of fraud. I was following protocol. No, ma'am, you weren't. Agent Monroe's voice was ice cold. That ticket was purchased by Marcus Woods. Does that name mean anything to you? Margaret hesitated. Should it? One of the other suited men spoke up. Marcus Woods, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Net worth $3.7 trillion. One of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. And the father of the child you just accused of fraud. The color drained from Margaret's face completely. Agent Monroe continued. Mr. Woods contacted our field office 7 minutes ago regarding a potential case of discrimination and harassment against his minor child. He also contacted the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and your CEO, all of whom are very interested in what happened here today. Officer Martinez turned to Charlotte, his expression completely different from the professional distance he'd planned to maintain. Sweetheart, are you Charlotte Woods? Charlotte nodded, wiping her eyes. Is your father on the phone right now? Another nod. Can I speak with him? Charlotte handed over her phone with shaking hands. Martinez took it. Mr. Woods? This is Officer James Martinez, LaGuardia Airport Security. Sir, your daughter is safe. I understand, sir. We're sorting this out right now. He listened for a moment, his eyebrows rising higher and higher. Yes, sir. I understand. We'll make sure she gets on that flight. You have my word. He handed the phone back to Charlotte, then turned to Margaret. His professional courtesy had evaporated. You tore up a valid ticket belonging to a 12-year-old child? I thought. You thought what? That a child with a legitimate ticket, traveling to see her sick grandmother, was somehow committing fraud. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. Officer Kim had been watching all of this with increasing anger. Did you run a system verification? I scanned the ticket. Did you run a full system check? No, but... So you destroyed a passenger's property, a minor's property, without following protocol, without verification, based purely on your own assumption. Derek, the other gate agent, spoke up quietly. I tried to tell her to check the system. Margaret whirled on him, but Agent Monroe cut her off. What specifically made you suspicious of this ticket? Margaret hesitated. The real answer was something she couldn't say out loud. The real answer was that she'd looked at a black child with a first-class ticket and decided it didn't fit. It seemed unusual for a 12-year-old to have. To have what? Kim pressed. A first-class ticket? Children of wealthy parents fly first class every day. What was unusual about this child specifically? Silence. One of Agent Monroe's colleagues had pulled out a tablet and was typing rapidly. I've got the ticket purchase record here. Purchased March 11th at 2:37 p.m. by Marcus Woods using a Platinum American Express card ending in 8472. Billing address matches Mr. Woods's primary residence. The purchase was flagged in our system because of the account holder's high-value status. There's actually a security notation on the ticket because Mr. Woods is on a protected persons list due to his wealth and public profile. This ticket has more verification than a standard ticket, not less. He looked up at Margaret. You tore up a ticket that had special security clearance. That's not just a policy violation. That's potentially a federal security issue. Margaret looked like she might faint. Officer Martinez knelt down so he was at eye level with Charlotte. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You didn't do anything wrong. Do you understand me? Nothing. Charlotte nodded, but fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. We're going to fix this, Martinez promised. He stood and pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Martinez at Gate C7. We need the airport director and a Coastal Airlines executive to this location immediately. Priority call. Static then, copy that. Airport director is already en route. Coastal executive arriving in 3 minutes. Agent Monroe was still staring at Margaret. You called security on a child under federal protection. Do you understand what that means? I didn't know. You didn't check. That's the problem. You made an assumption and acted on it without doing your due diligence. Charlotte's phone rang again. She looked at the screen. Dad. She answered. Dad. Marcus's voice came through, and everyone nearby could hear it. Baby girl, I'm so sorry. I should have told them who we are. I should have sent security with you. I thought. His voice broke slightly. I thought if we lived normal, people would treat you normal. I was wrong. It's not your fault, Dad. Yes, it is. But we're going to fix this. Are the FBI agents there? Yes. Good. Put me on speaker. Charlotte pressed the speaker button. Marcus's voice filled the gate area. This is Marcus Woods. To whom am I speaking? Agent Monroe stepped forward. Special Agent Lisa Monroe, FBI. Mr. Woods, your daughter is safe. We're handling the situation. Thank you, Agent Monroe. I appreciate the Bureau's response. Has airport management arrived? As if on cue, 2 people came rushing to the gate. A man in an airport director's uniform, 50s, slightly out of breath. And behind him, a woman in a Coastal Airlines executive suit, late 40s, with an expression of absolute horror on her face. The woman spoke first. Mr. Woods? This is Catherine Reynolds, Senior Vice President of Operations for Coastal Airlines. I just got off the phone with our CO. On behalf of Coastal Airlines, I cannot express how deeply sorry. Marcus's voice cut through the speaker. Ms. Reynolds. Your employee tore up my daughter's ticket and called security on her for the crime of being 12 years old with a first-class ticket. She made my daughter cry. She made my daughter feel like a criminal. She traumatized my child. What are you going to do about it? Catherine Reynolds looked at Margaret Thompson the way someone might look at a bomb that just went off. The employee will be terminated immediately. We will issue a full refund and compensation. We will. I don't want your money, Ms. Reynolds. I have more money than your entire company is worth. What I want is for this to never happen to another child. What I want is for you to explain how an employee with a 45-year record has been allowed to target passengers for years without consequences. Reynolds's eyes widened. We weren't aware. You weren't aware? Or you didn't care to look? Marcus's voice was cold now. Agent Monroe, I assume your team will be investigating whether this constitutes a pattern of discrimination? Yes, sir. We'll be requesting all complaint records from Coastal Airlines regarding this employee and others. Marcus continued. Ms. Reynolds, here's what's going to happen. You're going to put my daughter on the next available flight to Atlanta. First class. With a formal apology from your company. You're going to conduct a full audit of your discrimination complaints and make the findings public. You're going to implement real consequences for employees who target passengers based on race. And you're going to donate $10 million to civil rights organizations working on transportation equity. If you don't agree to all of that in the next 60 seconds, I'm buying a controlling stake in your company and making these changes myself. Your stock price is already dropping, by the way. Check your phone. Catherine Reynolds pulled out her phone. Her face went white. Coastal Airlines stock had dropped 4% in the last 10 minutes. The viral video was already spreading, but now people knew whose daughter this was. The market was reacting. We agree, Reynolds said quickly. All of it. We agree. Good. Now someone get my daughter a new ticket and let her see her grandmother. Derek had already printed a new ticket. He brought it to Reynolds, who personally handed it to Charlotte with shaking hands. Charlotte, I'm so deeply sorry this happened to you. This is not who we are as a company. Agent Monroe's colleague spoke up quietly. Actually, the complaint records suggest it might be exactly who you are as a company. But you have an opportunity to change that. Charlotte took the ticket, staring at it. Through the speaker, Marcus spoke gently. Baby, do you still want to get on that plane? I can have a jet there in an hour. You don't have to fly coastal if you don't want to. Charlotte thought about it. Thought about her grandmother waiting. Thought about all the times she'd flown this route without incident. Thought about what her father had taught her about not letting other people's prejudice make you small. I want to get on this plane, she said quietly. Grandma's waiting. Okay, baby. You call me the second you land. I will. And Charlotte. Yeah. I'm proud of you. You're the strongest person I know. They hung up. The gate area was completely silent now. Passengers who'd boarded were watching from the jetway windows. Those still waiting were staring. Charlotte walked to the podium. Margaret was no longer there. Catherine Reynolds had pulled her aside, and the FBI agents were talking to her. Derek was at the podium. He scanned Charlotte's new ticket with hands that shook slightly. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I tried to stop her. Charlotte looked at him. This young man who'd been too afraid to stand up to his supervisor. She understood. Fear makes people do nothing. But nothing is still a choice. I know, she said quietly. And she walked down the jetway. Behind her, she could hear Agent Monroe. Ms. Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about your complaint history. And Catherine Reynolds, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. And Officer Martinez, that little girl handled that with more grace than most adults would. Shame on all of you. Charlotte found her seat. 3, first class. The seat she'd been denied. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and finally, let herself breathe. Hit that subscribe button if you need to know what happens next, because this story is about to explode in ways no one at that gate could have predicted. Comment below, do you think Margaret knew exactly what she was doing, or was she genuinely convinced she was right? Because the internet is about to have a lot of opinions, and when they find out whose daughter this really is, the whole world is going to be watching. Charlotte Woods landed in Atlanta at 6:37 p.m. But she didn't land quietly. Waiting at the gate were 12 people. Her Aunt Michelle, crying. A hospital administrator from Grady Memorial. A representative from Coastal Airlines Atlanta operations. 3 members of her father's security team. 2 FBI agents assigned to escort her. And 4 Atlanta police officers providing additional protection, because by the time Charlotte's plane touched down, her name was everywhere. The video had started spreading the moment Carlos Rodriguez posted it from his seat on the delayed flight. But when people found out whose daughter this was, it didn't just go viral. It exploded. Aunt Michelle wrapped Charlotte in a hug so tight Charlotte could barely breathe. Baby, are you okay? Your daddy told me everything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But Charlotte barely heard her. Because her phone was vibrating nonstop. Notifications. News alerts. Her father calling. Messages from classmates. The world had discovered what happened while she was in the air. One of the security team members, a kind-faced woman named Janet, gently took Charlotte's backpack. Let's get you to the hospital, honey. Your grandmother's waiting. We'll handle everything else. They escorted Charlotte through the airport in a formation that looked almost presidential. People stopped and stared. Some pulled out phones to record. A few shouted questions. Charlotte, are you okay? Did they really tear up your ticket? Is your dad going to buy the airline? They loaded her into an SUV with tinted windows. Aunt Michelle sat beside her, holding her hand. Janet sat in front, coordinating security on a radio. Charlotte finally looked at her phone. She had 63 missed calls. 217 text messages. Her social media accounts, which she rarely used, had thousands of new followers. She opened Twitter. She was trending. Hashtag Charlotte Woods. Hashtag Coastal Airlines. Hashtag LaGuardia Incident. Hashtag Margaret Thompson. Hashtag Marcus Woods. The video had 43 million views. 43 million people had watched her cry. Watched her beg. Watched her ticket being destroyed. Watched her humiliation. But now they knew. Now everyone knew who her father was. The comments were overwhelming. She's Marcus Woods' daughter? The Margaret Thompson messed with a trillionaire's kid. This man could buy that entire airline with pocket change, and she tore up his daughter's ticket. Margaret Thompson had no idea who she just destroyed her career over. The audacity to tear up a ticket and call security on one of the richest men in the world's daughter. This isn't about money. This is about a black child being treated like a criminal regardless of who her father is. Even being the daughter of a trillionaire doesn't protect you from racism. Let that sink in. That last comment had 500,000 likes. The SUV pulled up to Grady Memorial Hospital. More security was waiting. They'd cleared a private entrance. Charlotte was escorted through hallways that had been temporarily closed to other visitors, up an elevator, down a corridor, to a private room where her grandmother was waiting. Lorraine was sitting up in bed, weak but alert. The moment she saw Charlotte's face, she started crying. Charlotte ran to her, collapsed into her grandmother's arms, and finally let everything out. When Charlotte could speak again, she told Lorraine everything. Every detail. The suspicion, the interrogation, the torn ticket, the humiliation, the security, the FBI, all of it. Lorraine listened with tears streaming down her face. When Charlotte finished, Lorraine held her granddaughter's face in her hands. "Baby, listen to me. That woman looked at you and saw something she feared. She didn't see your father's daughter. She didn't see a brilliant student. She didn't see a kind child visiting her sick grandmother. She saw a black girl and decided you didn't belong in that space. No amount of money changes that kind of seeing. That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? That your daddy's success, all that wealth, all that power, couldn't protect you from someone's prejudice." Charlotte nodded, unable to speak. "But you survived it. You stood there with grace. And now the whole world saw what happened. Sometimes the light is the only justice we get." While Charlotte sat with her grandmother, the world was moving fast. Margaret Thompson's life was disintegrating in real time. Within 2 hours of the video going viral with her name attached, she'd been identified completely. Her full employment history, her home address, her social media, everything. People found her Facebook posts. The ones about welfare fraud. The ones questioning why certain people always seem to be in first class. The political posts that made her biases clear. By midnight, major news outlets had the story. But they weren't just covering the incident anymore. They were covering who Charlotte's father was. Daughter of trillionaire Marcus Woods humiliated by airline employee. Multi-trillionaire's child denied flight despite valid ticket. Marcus Woods's daughter proves wealth can't protect against racism. The story was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, BBC, Al Jazeera. International coverage. Because this wasn't just about an airline incident anymore. This was about one of the most powerful men in the world having to watch his daughter be treated like a criminal. By Friday morning, journalists had done what coastal airlines had failed to do for years. They'd investigated Margaret Thompson's record. ProPublica's Jennifer Chen published her findings, 12 formal complaints against Margaret Thompson in 5 years. All from passengers of color. All questioning why their tickets were being scrutinized. All dismissed by coastal management. But the bombshell was what else they found. Margaret had been moved between gates and terminals not as punishment, but to diffuse passenger complaints. She'd been protected, shuffled around, kept employed despite a clear pattern. And coastal airlines had known. Internal emails obtained by journalists showed supervisors discussing Margaret's overzealousness and her tendency to profile certain passengers. But she was never disciplined beyond verbal warnings. She'd been with the company 45 years. She had seniority. She knew the system. So they'd look the other way. Until she tore up the ticket of one of the most powerful men in the world's daughter on camera. Coastal's stock continued to drop. By Friday close, it was down 11%. Billions in market value evaporated. Catherine Reynolds, the executive who'd apologized to Charlotte, held a press conference Friday afternoon. She stood at a podium, looking exhausted. "We failed Charlotte Woods. We failed the many passengers who complained about Ms. Thompson's conduct over the years and were not heard. We failed to create a culture where discrimination is not tolerated. For that, we are profoundly sorry." She outlined the changes: mandatory bias training, a complete audit of all discrimination complaints, a new passenger advocate position, the $10 million donation Marcus had demanded, and the immediate termination of 3 executives who'd been aware of complaints against Thompson and done nothing. We are also, she added, voice shaking slightly, releasing all records related to discrimination complaints against our employees to federal investigators and making them available to the public. Transparency is the only path forward. It was unprecedented, an airline voluntarily exposing its own failures. But the internet wasn't done. Margaret Thompson had become the face of systemic racism. Her photo was everywhere. T-shirts. Hashtags. LaGuardia Karen. She'd achieved a kind of viral infamy that would follow her forever. She tried to issue an apology, posted it on a new Facebook account Saturday morning. I want to apologize for my actions at LaGuardia Airport. I made a terrible mistake. I let my assumptions override my training and my common sense. I caused a child to suffer, and for that, I will be forever sorry. I have spent 45 years in this industry, and I thought I knew what fraud looked like. But what I saw was not fraud. It was my own prejudice reflected back at me. I am deeply ashamed. I ask for forgiveness from Charlotte Woods and her family, and I commit to doing the work to understand how I can be better. It was more honest than most viral apologies. It named the prejudice. It took responsibility. But it didn't matter. The comments were brutal. 45 years and you're just now realizing you're racist? You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. You destroyed a child's ticket. Apology not accepted. The only reason you're apologizing is because her dad is a trillionaire. If she was just a regular black kid, you wouldn't care. That last comment was probably true. And everyone knew it. Marcus Woods had stayed silent through most of this. But on Sunday, 3 days after the incident, he released a statement. Not through a PR firm. Not through lawyers. A personal statement from his own social media account, which had been dormant for years. It was long, thoughtful, painful. My daughter Charlotte is 12 years old. She is brilliant, kind, and brave. On Thursday, she tried to visit her grandmother, who was recovering from a stroke. She had every right to be on that flight. She had a valid ticket that I purchased. She did nothing wrong. I am one of the wealthiest people on earth. I have resources most people can't imagine. I can buy companies. I can move markets. I can make phone calls that mobilize FBI agents and airport directors. And yet, none of that protected my daughter from being looked at with suspicion, accused of fraud, and treated like a criminal. Some people have said this story is about Margaret Thompson. It's not. Margaret Thompson is a symptom of something much larger. This is about a culture that teaches people to view black children with suspicion, that assumes our presence in certain spaces must be explained or justified, that requires us to prove we belong over and over again in ways that other people never have to. I built my company from nothing. I created technology that changed the world. I employ hundreds of thousands of people. I give billions to charity. And still, my 12-year-old daughter was treated like a thief for having a first-class ticket. If this can happen to my daughter, with all the privilege my wealth provides, imagine what happens to children whose parents can't make calls to the FBI. Children whose stories never go viral. Children who are denied and doubted and dismissed with no one watching, no one recording, no one caring. Coastal Airlines has promised change. We'll see if those promises are kept. But this is bigger than one airline. This is about all of us. About what we assume when we see a black child in a space we've decided they don't belong. About who we believe and who we doubt. About who gets the benefit of the doubt and who has to prove their innocence. My daughter deserved better. Every child deserves better. To Charlotte, you are my heart. You handled yourself with more grace and strength than I could have. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. But I promise you, I will spend everything I have to make sure it's harder for this to happen to other children. To everyone who has shared their own stories in response to Charlotte's, I see you. I hear you. You are not alone. And to those who think this is about me leveraging my wealth, you're wrong. This is about my daughter being treated with basic human dignity. That shouldn't require billions of dollars. It should be free. The statement was shared millions of times. Read on air by news anchors. Published in full in newspapers around the world. And it shifted something. The conversation moved from, "Can you believe she messed with a trillionaire's daughter?" to, "Why does a child need a trillionaire father to be treated with dignity?" People started sharing their own stories again. But this time with a new understanding. Wealth doesn't protect you from racism. Success doesn't insulate you from prejudice. Being the child of one of the most powerful men in the world didn't stop a gate agent from tearing up your ticket. If it could happen to Charlotte Woods, it could happen to anyone. Subscribe right now if you want to see the moment when this entire story comes full circle. Because what happens when the most powerful man in the world decides that an apology isn't enough? Comment. Do you think public shaming like this leads to real change, or is it just performative justice? And what would you do if you had Marcus Woods's resources? 6 months later, Charlotte Woods was back at Brooklyn Prep Academy, starting 8th grade. But everything was different now. The video had faded from daily discourse the way viral stories do. There was always another scandal, another outage, another person being held accountable for 15 minutes before the world moved on. But the changes Charlotte's story had forced into motion were still reverberating. Coastal Airlines had followed through on every promise. The bias training was mandatory and ongoing. The Passenger Advocacy Office received over 3,000 complaints in its first month, all of which were being investigated. 6 more employees had been terminated for patterns of discrimination. The company had donated the $10 million to organizations working on transportation equity and civil rights. And Marcus Woods, true to his word, hadn't stopped there. He'd created the Charlotte Woods Foundation with an initial endowment of $5 billion. Its mission, to combat discrimination in public spaces and provide legal support to families who couldn't afford to fight back. Within 6 months, the foundation had taken on 47 cases of discrimination in airports, hotels, stores, and schools. They'd won 38 of them. Marcus had also done something else. He'd bought a controlling stake in Coastal Airlines. Not to destroy it, to transform it. Under his ownership, Coastal became the first major airline to implement real-time bias monitoring systems, transparent complaint reporting, and zero-tolerance policies with actual teeth. Employee turnover was high at first as the culture shifted, but customer satisfaction scores went up. And quietly, without fanfare, the number of discrimination complaints dropped by 73%. Margaret Thompson had disappeared completely. She'd moved out of New York to a small town in Pennsylvania. She'd lost her pension and her benefits in the termination. She lived quietly now, working part-time at a local library. Some people said she'd found religion. Others said she was just hiding. She tried, once, to reach out to Charlotte. A handwritten letter sent to Marcus's office. It never reached Charlotte. Marcus's assistant had screened it, consulted with therapists, and decided Charlotte didn't need to carry the burden of her trauma perpetrator's guilt. The letter was filed away, unread by the person it was meant for. But Charlotte knew it existed. And sometimes she wondered what it said. If it was real remorse or just more self-preservation. She decided she didn't need to know. Some questions didn't need answers. What Charlotte did need was therapy. Lots of it. Dr. Patricia Williams, the psychologist who specialized in racial trauma, had been seeing Charlotte weekly since 2 weeks after the incident. They'd worked through the trauma, the hypervigilance, the panic attacks that came whenever Charlotte had to fly. And there were still panic attacks. Not every time, but sometimes. Usually triggered by something small. A TSA agent looking at her too long. A gate agent asking an extra question. The sound of paper tearing. Dr. Williams had explained that trauma doesn't follow a neat timeline. You can heal and still have scars, she told Charlotte. That's not weakness. That's being human. Charlotte still flew to Atlanta. Still visited her grandmother, who'd made a remarkable recovery. Lorraine was back in her house with the garden and the porch, walking with just a slight limp now, her speech nearly back to normal. But Charlotte never flew alone anymore. Not because she couldn't. She probably could have, eventually. But because Marcus had made a decision after that day in March. His daughter's independence wasn't worth her trauma. So now, when Charlotte flew, either Marcus went with her, or Aunt Michelle, or one of the trusted security team members who'd been specially trained in supporting young people. Charlotte had protested at first. Said she wanted to be normal. Wanted to prove she could do it. But Marcus had sat her down and said something that changed her perspective. Baby, there's a difference between being strong and being alone. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to me, not to the world, not to yourself. If having someone with you makes you feel safer, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. So Charlotte accepted it. The security, the escorts, the extra precautions. And slowly, flying became easier. At school, Charlotte was still the same student she'd always been. Honor roll. Debate captain. But now she was also something else. A symbol. Other students looked at her differently. Some with admiration. Some with pity. Some with curiosity. She'd been invited to speak at events. Youth conferences. Civil rights organizations. A TED Talk invitation that she declined. Everyone wanted to hear from the girl in the video. The trillionaire's daughter who'd been humiliated and then vindicated. Charlotte said no to most of it. She didn't want to be the poster child for discrimination. She wanted to be a 12-year-old girl who liked debate and history and reading books. But she'd said yes to a few things. Small things. A conversation with a group of middle schoolers at a Brooklyn community center about standing up for yourself. A video message for a civil rights organization's fundraiser. A written piece for Teen Vogue about what it felt like to have your worst moment watched by millions. In that piece, she'd written something that got quoted everywhere. People keep asking me if I'm glad the video went viral. If I'm happy that Margaret Thompson got fired. If I feel like justice was served. The truth is, I don't know. What I know is that my grandmother is alive and I got to see her. What I know is that my dad loves me enough to move mountains when I'm hurting. What I know is that millions of people saw what happened and believed me, believed that I didn't deserve it. That means something. But I also know that if my dad wasn't Marcus Woods, this story would be different. If he was just a regular person, maybe no one would have cared. Maybe that video would have gotten 1,000 views instead of millions. Maybe Margaret Thompson would still have her job. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not what happened to me, but what happens to kids whose stories don't go viral. Who gets justice for them? That question had resonated. It had sparked conversations. Policy discussions. More organizations focusing on discrimination that happened off camera. Charlotte had changed the conversation. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd been forced to. In November, Charlotte had to fly to Atlanta for her grandmother's birthday. The surprise party that Aunt Michelle had planned. Marcus had 3 major business meetings scheduled, acquisitions worth billions. But he cleared his calendar without hesitation. The meetings can wait, he'd said. My daughter can't. They flew together. Private jet this time, not because Charlotte couldn't handle commercial, but because Marcus wanted her to feel safe. Wanted her to associate flying with peace again, not trauma. In the jet, somewhere over Virginia, Charlotte looked at her father. Dad? Do you ever regret it? Regret what, baby? Being so successful. Having so much money. If we were just normal, maybe that lady wouldn't have been so suspicious. Maybe she would have just let me on the plane. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. Because if we were normal, I wouldn't have been able to mobilize the FBI in 7 minutes. I wouldn't have been able to force real changes at that airline. I wouldn't have been able to create a foundation that's helping dozens of other families fight discrimination. The money didn't protect you from Margaret Thompson's prejudice. But it gave us tools to fight back that most people don't have. And that's a responsibility, not a burden. But it's not fair. No, baby. It's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. You shouldn't have needed a trillionaire father to be believed. You should have been believed because you were a child with a valid ticket telling the truth. But the world doesn't work that way. So we use what we have to make it better. Charlotte nodded. The foundation helped that family in Texas, right? The one where the hotel called the police on them. Yes. We got their legal fees covered. The hotel settled. Changed their policies. Good. They landed in Atlanta. Lorraine's birthday party was perfect. Family, friends, her grandmother's favorite cake. Lorraine cried when she saw Charlotte and Marcus together, healthy and whole. Later that night, on Lorraine's porch, the three of them sat together. Marcus had his arm around Charlotte. Lorraine held Charlotte's hand. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Lorraine said, her voice strong now, fully recovered. "Not that your daddy has all that money. Not that he forced that airline to change. I'm proudest that you're still you, baby. Still kind. Still brave. Still willing to fly on planes and go to schools and exist in the world even after someone tried to make you feel like you didn't belong." Charlotte leaned into her grandmother. "Sometimes I don't feel brave. That's because you don't understand what bravery is. Bravery isn't not being scared. Bravery is being scared and doing it anyway. You're scared every time you go to an airport now, aren't you?" Charlotte nodded. "But you still go. That's bravery." September 24th. 8 months after the incident. Charlotte had to fly to a debate tournament in Boston. Her team had qualified for nationals. It was a big deal. Marcus had meetings he couldn't reschedule this time. Critical negotiations in Singapore. But he'd arranged for Charlotte's Aunt Michelle to go with her. They flew commercial. Coastal Airlines, actually. Charlotte had insisted. "I'm not going to let her steal airlines from me," Charlotte had said. "I flew Coastal 15 times before her. It's my airline too." At the gate, not C7, that would be too much, but B12, Charlotte watched the passengers board. Families. Business travelers. College students. Normal people living normal lives. The gate agent was a young Latino woman with kind eyes. Her name tag read, Sofia Martinez. When Charlotte handed her the boarding pass, Sofia scanned it without hesitation. "Have a great flight, Charlotte." That was it. No questions. No suspicion. No drama. Just a normal interaction. Charlotte walked down the jetway with Aunt Michelle beside her. Found her seat. Buckled in. As the plane took off, Charlotte looked out the window at the New York skyline disappearing below. She thought about everything that had changed in 8 months. The viral video. The foundation. The policies. Margaret Thompson's firing. The national conversation about discrimination. But mostly she thought about what hadn't changed. She was still Charlotte Woods. Still 12 years old, now almost 13. Still a girl who loved her grandmother and her father and debate and history. Still a girl who sometimes had nightmares about torn tickets and cold voices saying, "I know fraud when I see it." Still a girl who had to carry the weight of being a symbol when all she wanted to be was a student. Margaret Thompson had looked at Charlotte and seen what she feared. Had never seen Charlotte's humanity, her story, her grief over her sick grandmother. Had just seen a black girl with something valuable and decided it couldn't be real. And in that decision, Margaret had changed Charlotte's life forever. Not broken her. Charlotte wasn't broken. But changed her. Made her warier. More careful. More aware of how the world saw her. The wealth hadn't protected her from the assumption. But it had given her the power to fight back. To force change. To make sure the next Charlotte Woods might have a different story. Her ticket had always been valid. She just wished she'd never had to prove it. But she had proven it. To Margaret Thompson. To Coastal Airlines. To the millions of people who watched the video. To herself. And in proving it, she'd proven something bigger. That prejudice doesn't care about your bank account. That assumptions about who belongs where can target anyone. That even the daughter of a trillionaire has to fight for dignity. But also that she could fight. And win. And survive. And still be herself on the other side. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Charlotte pulled out her debate notes. She had a tournament to win. If you made it to the end of this story, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Tell me, what lessons do you think Charlotte learned that she shouldn't have had to learn? Do you think having wealth made her experience better or worse? And for those of you who've experienced something similar, how did you find the strength to keep moving forward? This is the kind of story we need to keep telling because wealth doesn't protect you from racism, but it can give you the tools to fight back. Thank you for watching.